Hi, I'm Tamara Venit-Shelton from the History Department at Claremont McKenna College. Who was Junipero Serra and why are his statues coming down? On Saturday, June 20th, a group of Indigenous activists gathered at Father Serra Park in downtown Los Angeles and pulled down the statue at its center. That statue was of someone who may or may not be familiar to you. If you grew up in California, you may know his name from the many streets or public landmarks that bear it. Or you might remember being an elementary school student building a diorama depicting his time. Statues in his image are scattered across the state in churches and missions, in parks, high schools, and private lawns. He was Junipero Serra, an 18th century Spanish friar from the Franciscan order who founded California's first mission in 1770. And he's credited as being the principal architect of the California mission system. The California mission system was one part of a larger engine of European colonialism, driving the mass dispossession, forced assimilation, and enslavement of indigenous peoples in the Americas. The history and memory of Junipero Serra and the California missions is a slightly different but equally troubled story. It begins with the mid-19th century conquest of California by predominantly Protestant Anglo-Americans and the regime of white supremacy they imposed. When California became part of the United States in 1848, its new leadership sought to legitimize their territorial claims, at least in part by telling stories. These were essentially origins stories about white people in California. Sometimes they were about events in the recent past, like the gold rush. Sometimes they were about the quite distant past, like the arrival of Sir Francis Drake, the British privateer, on the coast of Northern California in 1579. And sometimes they were about the Spanish missions. For all of these stories, the moral at the end was the same. California was destined to belong to Anglo-America. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, historians, novelists, and real estate developers popularized stories about Junipero Serra and images of the California missions as they never were, peaceful, pastoral, and harmless. These images took shape in California architecture. They appeared in books, in plays, in pageants. They were affixed to orange crate labels. The stories portrayed indigenous people of California as docile and welcoming, and they portrayed the Spanish and the Mexicans who succeeded them as ultimately destined to decline and submit before a rising Anglo-American power. At the turn of the 20th century, exclusive clubs for native-born white Californians paid to put up statues of Serra and to restore the California missions, not only as a symbol of California's unique and colorful heritage, but also as sites that reaffirmed Anglo-American dominance. At a time when new immigration from Southern and Eastern Europe and Asia was making California and the United States increasingly diverse, those statues and the missions helped permanently inscribe white power into the urban landscape. We live in a moment when the Serra statue in Los Angeles and others like it are coming down. The generation that put them up intended them to tell a story of their California. And now a new generation asserts its right to tell its own story. There are important questions to ask about these monuments. Do they have historical and artistic merit that makes them worthy of preservation? Should the movement to dismantle them go further? Should it aim to rename every street, every building and city that bears the name of a kidnapper, a murderer, or a thief? Should it replace their legacy with another? Or can these monuments be recontextualized to tell a different story or maybe additional stories. Public spaces are not very good at conveying complex narratives, but we can imagine some possibilities. Let me give an example. Back in 1992, the city of San Francisco began commissioning artists to design posters for its bus kiosks. One artist, Luis de Soto, reimagined a map of San Francisco. All along Junipero Serra Boulevard, a miles-long corridor that stretches from Daly City into the southwest corner of San Francisco, he relabeled the cross streets. He renamed them, each for a California tribe that had been displaced, enslaved, or destroyed by the mission system. His poster presented a new possibility for the kind of story that San Francisco street names can tell. Now, my grandmother lived off of Junipero Serra Boulevard for many years, and I've been thinking about the hundreds of times that I drove up and down it, going to or from her house. All those times, I never thought about the actual Junipero Serra, or for that matter, any of the names of other streets in her neighborhood. Anza, Balboa, Cabrillo, these were all names of Spanish explorers and conquerors. Street names, like statues, hide the legacy of conquest in plain sight. These civil rights demonstrations are not only dismantling Junipero Serra statues, they are bringing California's history out of hiding. They present us with an opportunity to think as a community about the stories we want to tell, about the meaning of the past for the present and the future of our California.